If everything happens for a reason, what is the point of praying? If it all turns out according to God's plan anyways, then why even take the time? This is a question I've thought of before too. You know, you read in Matthew chapter 6, it's interesting. Right before in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus starts into teaching his disciples how to pray, what we often call the Lord's Prayer. He mentions this thing where he goes, the Father already knows what you need before you ask it, which is kind of a funny way of introducing prayer. He's saying, God already knows, now ask him for it. So I can understand, you know, the challenge here. But again, let's remember relationship. That's we're talking about disciplines that help us grow in a relationship. So imagine, parents, if you would, for a moment, imagine if our kids thought that same way about us. Like what if they were like, well, why even ask dad?
Right.
Because all that's going to happen is dad's going to get his way. It's going to all happen according to his plan. And so then they just silently follow along and never voice their dreams or their thoughts. That wouldn't be much of a relationship, right?
No, not at all.
And I know I can speak for you, Jen, and for so many parents out there, we love when our kids just come to us and tell us what's on their hearts.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of times where we've known something is going on, and yet it's so good to hear from our kids.
Right.
But then there are sometimes...
Well, it builds the relationship.
Exactly. But then there are some times with our kids where they tell us something brand new. What's interesting about the intimacy we have with the Father is that you'll never take him something that he didn't already know.
Yeah.
And so there's again, it's building the relationship. So I think really to answer the question, we have to go back to what is the purpose of prayer.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we mistakenly think that prayer is meant for a different reason. So let me clarify. Prayer is not designed, it's not about getting our way. Prayer is about getting to know God more.
Right.
It's a discipline that helps us build our relationship. And prayer is ultimately a way that we communicate to God that we trust him. Think about it. The very act of prayer communicates that I don't have this figured out. I don't have my hands wrapped around this. I can't do this on my own. I need to ask God's intervention.
Right.
The very act of prayer humbles our hearts, if done correctly, humbles our hearts, and it just gives us this opportunity to lay out our feelings and our frustrations and our needs. In fact, it gives us access to the power of God in our lives.
Right.
Like I'm thinking of Philippians chapter 4. We all want peace. And the Bible promises peace that surpasses understanding.
Yeah.
Peace that it means peace so unbelievable that we can't even wrap our minds around how I could be at peace in the middle of the chaos of my life. But that peace, according to Philippians chapter 4, is only accessible through prayer, by us laying out our request before the Lord.
Yeah.
But then again, what's interesting is that he already knows that, you know? So prayer isn't about changing God's heart. No. I think that's important. It's really about changing our heart.
Yeah.
And an amazing miracle takes place when we regularly pray. I often think of Psalm 37, verse 4, where it says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." So I think that "give you the desires of your heart" has a couple meanings. As we delight in him, that's the relationship, right? It's a discipline that leads to a relationship. He places desires on our hearts, and then he gives us the things that we now desire.
Right. He puts those desires there.
He put the desires there, and then as we're praying, because we know him, and as we're delighting ourselves in him, we begin to fall in love with the things that he loves.
Yeah.
It's the same thing when you've fallen in love with somebody before. You start to love the things that they love. It's the same with God. Delight ourselves in him. He places desires on our hearts, and then he gladly answers and provides those desires.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's practical when it comes to prayer. Again, kind of like Bible study, stay at it.
Right.
Even when it's hard,
Right.
even when it doesn't seem to make sense, you're getting to know God more.
I love what you said, that prayer, it's not about changing God's heart. It really is about changing our heart.
Right.
It's about aligning our hearts with his.
Right.
That's good.